Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Rogers, and on behalf of the Attitude team, I'm so pleased to welcome you to today's ADHD Experts presentation titled Oversharing and Underinvesting, the Social Traps that Snare ADHD Adults. Leading today's presentation is Caroline Maguire. Caroline is the author of the award-winning book, Why Will No One Play With Me?, written to coach emotional regulation, social and self-awareness, and responsible decision-making skills. She has also founded the Fundamentals of ADHD Coaching for Families, which is a training program at the ADD Coach Academy. In today's webinar, we are going to discuss the social traps and friendship foibles that impact specifically adults with ADHD whose inattention or impulsivity or emotional dysregulation may strain connections with others. So Caroline will share ADHD-friendly strategies that acknowledge these challenges and work to build confidence in social settings. And finally, the sponsor of today's webinar is Inflow. Have you ever shared your entire life story with someone after meeting them for the first time? Inflow knows that oversharing is a common challenge for many people with ADHD, and they're here to help. Developed by leading clinicians, Inflow's CBT-based program is your starting point for managing your ADHD, embracing neurodiversity, and helping you feel more comfortable in conversation. Click the link on your screen to get your ADHD score today and kick off your Inflow journey. Attitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. Okay, without any further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome Caroline Maguire. Caroline, thank you so much for joining us today and leading this discussion on discussions.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here, everyone. I'm Caroline Maguire, and I want to say first, I definitely was impacted by bullying as a kid. It's sort of a matter of public record. I've done a lot of interviews, and there's a piece of Why Will No One Play With Me where I talk about it. And I am ADHD. I have a varied amount of learning disabilities as well. And I want to say from the start that there's no judgment here. I also overshare. I have long been struggling with this. And I always say, I am just the person who thinks about this all the time. And for the past 18 years, since I started in this space and started as an ADHD coach, I have found that we are struggling with social things and I've wanted to help. So definitely don't think that I am perfect. I work on this every day. And what I also want to do is make all the strategies I suggest and the approach work for you. So it's not how many friends do I think you need, it's what do you want and what makes you happy. And I might share research that tells you, wow, these friendship chemicals are great and it takes these many social interactions to get there, but you're really the one in charge of figuring out how to make being social more ADHD friendly for you. And so part of what I want to start with is we really want to use strategies and make this whole process very ADHD friendly. We have to think about our neurology. We do friendship differently. And my whole goal and our goal is to help us belong and find connection. And understanding our brain and our neurology really helps. And then to think about, okay, what do I want out of friendship? If we want to belong and feel that we are, with the people who make us happiest, we have to be able to connect, and then we can show people our authentic, wonderful selves. As I think about how to make things ADHD friendly and I think about strategies, I think of a few things. I want to think about our strengths, which are always important to feel good. I want to make sure it's accessible for our brain, takes into account interest and boredom, since those are two huge drivers for our brain, right? And then we want to make sure that we think about situational variability, meaning the environment impacts who we are. So we asked the question about oversharing at the beginning. It might be that environment impacts how you are able to show up. And that is something that I really think we sometimes forget. So we're thinking about things to do that are ADHD friendly, right? And much of the advice out there is not ADHD friendly. It doesn't really apply to us. I read it and I think that's really nice. I wish I could do that. If I could do that, I would do that. So part of what we're going to talk about here are specific friendship snafus and things that come up for us. And one of them is sort of overinvesting and underinvesting. And I absolutely loved this title when they sent it to me. When I say underinvesting, this was a question that came up ahead of the webinar a lot. There's a certain amount of participation and what we could call investment that you have to do in friendship in order to have a relationship. Relationships grow over time. They're built. They're not necessarily something that just happens, right? This is all hard for us, so I'm not oblivious to that, believe me. And sometimes, I don't know about you all, but we go to these friendship extremes where we're either over-investing, I'm giving you everything I've got, or we're under-investing. And that can look like I just am so terrified I don't necessarily show up all the time, or I hold back my true self. Or it can be that we're not necessarily regulating social effort. I make a huge effort in June, July, and August. I go to different things. I participate. I call people. And then come November, I kind of crash and I don't do anything. We also have to feel socializing is worth it. This is something that I think not everyone understands, but I certainly feel this way, and it's brought to my attention a lot by my clients, which is when I go somewhere, I tend to, I don't know about you, complain all the way there. And then when I finally get there, you can't drag me away. But part of that is, does it feel good? Is it interesting? We also often feel it out of sight, out of mind, which causes us to underinvest, right? I forget about being social. I'm so busy because I'm behind constantly on everything that by the time I think about it, it becomes sort of a chore, and then I don't do that. This fits into our time blindness, right? There's another factor I want us to think about, and I really want to make sure I don't push people into any kind of ruminative cycle. And as a champion ruminator, I really want to make sure of that. But sometimes people are making what Dr. John Gottman calls bids or overtures toward us. They are actually showing us signs that they want to be friends. But because we're either having rejection sensitivity, or we've had a hard time, being bullied as a kid, or maybe we just miss stuff and we don't notice, we don't invest in that relationship because we don't really realize that the person is making overtures, little things that they're doing to try to be friends with us. So here's the thing. I'm going to talk about how to overcome the hurdles that come with this in a minute, but we do need regular contact, regular participation, and to see people in order for our friendships to grow. Even if we're talking about seeing neurodivergent folks, we do have to give that relationship some investment so that we spend time, have shared experiences, and grow the relationship. So here's a few suggestions for the underinvesting. Make it a routine. If it's a regular poker night, if it's something you do every Monday morning, if it's something that's part of what I call your infrastructure, it's part of your life and you go all the time and you're able to participate with people, you're able to have shared experiences, it's a lot easier than having to try to remember. The other thing is have a regular time to check in, right? So I use what I call anchors, which is that certain times of the day. I use when I'm waiting for my kid's bus, to be truthful. I will actually make that a time to check in. That infrastructure and those anchors make it so that I don't have to remember. It becomes a ritual. I also love this by Barbara Luther, who is at the ADD Coach Academy with me. She always says, re-sparkleize things. When something gets boring, we have to put a little sparkle and we have to put some bling on it and we have to make it interesting again. Because sometimes when we're with someone or we're doing these rituals, for no apparent reason whatsoever, we stop doing them because it gets a little boring and a little mundane. So then re-sparkleize it and it'll come to life again.
You've worked hard for what you have. Your money, your assets, your 401k, and home. Isn't it all worth protecting? Nearly 1 in 4 consumers have been a victim of identity theft. LifeLock Ultimate Plus helps protect your finances with up to $3 million in reimbursement. LifeLock alerts you to identity threats you might miss. And if your identity is stolen, your dedicated U.S.-based restoration specialist will work to fix it. Let LifeLock help protect what you've worked so hard for. Save 25% off your first year on LifeLock Ultimate Plus at LifeLock.com/aware. Terms apply.
We have to think about what stimuli we're paying attention to. So there's, all this stuff coming at us, and one of the things we can do is be paying attention to something that actually isn't helping us with our friendship investment. So what is it that we're paying attention to, and how can we make friendship come on our radar? The other thing that happens to us, I'm sure you've experienced this, I certainly have, is the shame cycle. Many of my clients will say, I haven't seen someone in so long, so I can't see them because now they're going to wonder why I haven't shown up for so long. And that shame cycle keeps us from investing. And so I want to encourage you. After the last webinar I did for Attitude, I said this. I said, please reach out to those people, your friends from college, your friends from childhood. We have strategies for this. They will be thrilled to hear from you. And many of you reached out to me and said, I did, and they were thrilled. So we get into this self-talk that's very negative and this shame cycle, and it keeps us from the people who would probably love to hear from us. And we can be cute about it. We can say, hey, I know I disappeared, but here I am, I'm back. How much investment do we need? People are always asking me, like, how much of this do I have to do, Caroline? I really want to say it's a choice, right? But here's some data. Research shows that seeing someone 2 times a week helps build a friendship, that friendships take about 6 months to build, and that you have to have about 6 different encounters of 3 hours for a period of 6 months. So is that set in stone? No. Actually, the research is always kind of funny to me because they basically say, like, we don't really know, but this is what we think. I think that some people you click with and you connect with right away, and we really love that. We love it when we just zing with someone, we connect right away, we get along right away, and we don't really have to build things. But in most cases, we do have to build, and we want to build because then we're getting into relationships that are healthier for us. I know that when we rush into relationships, sometimes they're not the best relationships. One of the things that I've worked out with many of my clients is some strategies for, my goal is to have more friends. My goal is to see people. My goal is to keep up with these longer term people, but I talk myself out of it and I go and I lay on the couch. What are the things we can do to kind of guard against that, to talk to that inner self when you want to opt out? So one of the things I've come up with are 3 questions to ask yourself. And, if you ask yourself those questions and you decide you really want to stay home and you want to opt out, that's totally fine. And, I am totally aware of social anxiety. Some of this is very hard. One of them is, will this impact my friendship long term? So, if you skip someone's wedding, they might get upset and it might impact your friendship long term. Does it hurt the other person? Are they getting an award? Is it something really important to them? And it will hurt them. It will make them feel badly. And I want to think about that. And then the last one is, will it hurt my friendship goals? And I have to say this to myself all the time, because sometimes we're in that immediate zone where it's now, and we're not thinking about the not now, the future, when I'm going to say, wow, I really want people to hang out with. And we want to think about that. And that's why I have the 3 questions. So we can ask ourselves, do I want to opt out or do I want to go? And by the way, you don't have to go to everything, right? I think there's want to versus willing to do. And I think the more we create high interest activities that make us feel good, where we meet people and we have shared experiences, and it's something that we don't find boring and that we find comfortable for sensory issues and anxiety, the better. And there are those activities out there. And I talk about this a ton on my website, CarolineMaguireAuthor.com. I have so many blogs with ideas out there. So I do think that there's a reality here, which is that we may need an exit strategy. Maybe you're going to something because you don't want to hurt someone's feelings and you know that it's going to impact the friendship long term, but this isn't the best thing for you, right? Or you just need to go while there's not a big crowd, and then when it starts to get crowded, we exit. So one of my things is an exit strategy. So plan ahead. Long goodbyes send me over the edge. I'm going to really tell you this. If you say goodbye for 30 minutes and I'm with you and I need to go, I am holding on to my self-regulation and I am losing it and I don't have it for much longer. So I need to go. So I always inform the host ahead of time if I'm planning to leave early, and I prevent the long goodbye. I use a little code word or something with whoever I'm with. I'm taking the kids to the car is the code word for, let's go. Don't be afraid to take breaks. If you need to step away, play Candy Crush and then come back. And if you want, and if you can, engage a partner, engage someone to help you so that you can get in and out in a way that works for you. Overinvesting. So I don't know about all of you, but one of the things that my clients do and that I do is that we rush into friendship. We go in and we give everything we have. And part of that is chasing that sparkle, that dopamine rush. And what happens is we're expecting a level of friendship and intimacy and closeness right away. And we kind of get into that all or nothing thinking pattern where we want it to be really fast. And we might be giving more than the other person, and we might be sharing more than the other person. And sometimes I know one thing that comes up is we rush into friendship, we give everything, and then we realize this person isn't great for us. This person, there's red flags that I didn't see because I rushed into friendship. There's things about them that I don't necessarily fit with who I am or my values. And then we're trying to repeat, backpedal out. So that's why what I'm sort of proposing is we know that about ourselves, but that we build the relationship more, because then you can feel people out, which you have the right to do. You have the right to feel people out and say, oh, wow, what you're saying doesn't fit with my values at all. I don't think that this is a good match. And you can create some rules for yourself. You can say, I have a tendency toward people pleasing a little bit. I tend to give too much. Maybe you buy dinner all the time, or you fall into certain traps trying to make friends. Here's some things. I'm not going to pay. I'm going to split. I'm going to try to match someone rather than giving or taking. I'm going to try to match with them reciprocally. And that can start to help this snafu where we overinvest and we rush in and it feels so good, but then sometimes it gets us into trouble. So mindset, I think, is a big part of this friendship struggle for those of us with ADHD. I think it's an under-discussed topic. If you read Jessica McCabe's new book, How to ADHD, I wrote with her the How to People chapter, and I talk a lot about mindset. Mindset can also influence us because we have these stories, this inner narrative, this self-talk in our minds, maybe because we had a hard time and we think things about ourselves. Like if we think we are too much, or we think we are not enough, or we think these negative things, then we approach the friendship with this negative view of ourselves. And often we come from this place of scarcity, as if we have to be grateful for whatever people throw to us, as if we are not good friends, which is not true. You offer so many wonderful things in friendship. And I know that we are fun and creative and we have so much to offer. And part of that comes from the past, right? It comes from being a kid who wasn't always picked, being a kid who was left out. We then tend to go into another mindset, which is this all or nothing thinking, or black and white thinking, where things were good or bad. The day was good or wonderful. It was the best day or it was the worst day ever. And that tends to mean that we opt out very quickly. We say, this relationship just isn't working. I'm out. I'm done. It's over. Versus realizing that we want to look at some things, see whether there are red flags in the relationship, see whether we're enjoying ourselves, and be a little more thoughtful about it. And also remember to work on that negative self-talk that's affecting how we show up. The other mindset that gets us into snafus is what I call anxious overcorrection. So we overshare, we do something, and because we have these negative stories, because things have happened in the past, we want to clarify or apologize, and we send, 15 anxious texts explaining what we meant by a comment. The other person might not have noticed our comment, might not have cared, but what happens is when we send these 15 texts, we put ourselves in a position where now they're noticing, and we make ourselves seem like we're at fault when maybe it was just one comment. If we didn't offend anyone, we don't want to have that mindset. But that is often the mindset that we go in with because of the past. Many of you asked questions before the webinar, and one of the biggest things I noticed was this feeling that you're not good at friendship, when I think we have to heal that inner child of ours and remind ourselves that maybe I struggled as a kid, but now I didn't have the tools and I didn't have the path forward and I didn't have the ADHD friendly strategies. Now I'm going to have them. So I want us to challenge that inner voice, to rework on our self-talk, and that all or nothing thinking. Whenever you hear yourself say always, never, to sort of challenge that and look at the facts. What are the facts? Are they never returning your text, or is it just this time? One of the things that Jessica McCabe and I found when we were researching the How to People chapter, her wonderful researcher, Patrick LeConte, found was that a research that's for children, but I think it applies to us too. There's not that much research on ADHD adult friendship, unfortunately. One of the things the research found was that ADHD children tend to base their opinion of a relationship on the last social interaction they had. And I don't know about you, but I read that and I was like, oh my gosh, yes, it plays into that all or nothing thinking. We've had a 20-year great relationship. We've had our ups and downs, but mostly it's been great. But we have one bad interaction and I go to that all or nothing thinking. Or we have one sort of interaction that I'm not sure about, and I decide, you must not like me. It's over. They're not interested in me. it's that we have to sort of challenge a little bit before we opt out of relationships and think about, is this one interaction true? And do I have any evidence? What's the evidence that this person wasn't showing up for me or didn't like me? Challenge that story in our mind, because sometimes the story isn't true. One of the other snafu is oversharing. So sharing is something that makes us build relationships. We want to be vulnerable sometimes, but we tend to have a propensity toward going down the rabbit hole a little bit. And I don't know about you, but I sometimes have an overwhelming urgency to share. Like, I want to share this information with you. And we sometimes misjudge our relationships. And instead of sharing with our closest friends, closest relatives, people we know and have a history of trust with, we share with random strangers. And although sharing is part of making friends, sharing can make you a little vulnerable. It can be off-putting to other people, even neurodivergent people. Other people are just not expecting it, or they start to wonder, well, what are you sharing about me? So the oversharing thing is a struggle that many of us have. And the first thing I want to highlight is that we all have different trust and closeness and intimacy with different people. And one of the things I think we do is when we go down the rabbit hole and we're oversharing our, history of money, our social security number, our relationships, we forget that the person we're talking to, we don't have a history of trust with them, and that the levels of trust and intimacy in our history with a person really informs what we share with whom. And trust builds over time. So if someone is an acquaintance, if they're a buddy, if they're somebody we just met, they're not necessarily someone we know what they're going to do with that information. We know we can trust them, and they're not someone we maybe have a history with. Every culture has social norms. Some of you are going to say to me in the chat, in the group that I am in the culture that I am in a certain circumstances, you overshare. It's no big deal. It's the social norm. Awesome. I totally hear you. When we are at the international conference, people come up to each other and we support each other as people with ADHD, and we do share more. I'm talking about this thing where, I'm talking to someone at the grocery store and I tell them like the history of trauma in my family. And it's really hard because what happens when we overshare is that we then tend to have this, I call it a self-regulation hangover, where like I then get in my car and I'm like, oh my God, why did I do that? And it's not easy. I want to say first that as I think about curbing oversharing, you'll notice I didn't use the word stop, because one of the things that drives me bonkers is that if you read just blogs on the internet and stuff, people say stop oversharing. This is a complicated thing, right? It's based on what we're paying attention to at the time. Self-regulation, modeling, how are we taught to share? Us paying attention to the situation or environment. It is a complicated thing, and I don't think anyone just stops oversharing. My experience with the groups that I've run for this to help adults with ADHD learn to curb oversharing, my clients, myself, is that you get up every day and you work on this, and I'm going to describe how you work on it in a sec, and we try to do better. But I think to hold ourselves to a standard of 100% is going to make us feel really bad. And I also think it's so much pressure. This is something that when I work with clients, we set an intention that this is the thing that they're going to try to work on. Not this and 8 million other things, this is something that every time they enter a doorway, or every time they are in a conversation, we're working on this. And this is something that takes time. And it takes practice. And you may sometimes overshare. And I would like us to practice some self-compassion, some self-forgiveness, and not beat ourselves up. And also, you can make a choice. You might be in a conversation with someone and you say, I am thinking about my level of intimacy with them and relationship and closeness, and they've given me certain signals, and I'm going to go ahead and share. And that's totally your choice. Everything for me is about understanding and then making a choice. So how do we curb oversharing? One of the things we want to do is identify when you tend to overshare. One of the things I found over the years is that there are topics that we tend to overshare on. There are circumstances, maybe special interests. Maybe there are situations when you're tired or you're with certain people and you're more anxious, where we tend to overshare. Anxiety can be a huge factor here. I also have read a lot of research that connects oversharing to loneliness. So if you're feeling particularly vulnerable, particularly lonely, and you just have a deep desire to connect with someone, you might overshare because you're kind of misjudging the person because you're just so excited to be with someone. And I know I've definitely gone down that rabbit hole as a result. And the other piece is self-regulation. When I work with clients and for myself, often we're late and we didn't find parking. And, I couldn't even find the keys in my purse. And then I get to the event, and instead of sitting in the car for 2 minutes to gather myself, doing some of my self-regulation techniques, pausing and sort of centering myself, I'm like, I'm late, I gotta go. And one of the things I would say as a sales pitch is the more we take those 2 minutes to sort of center ourselves and do some deep breaths, the more as we enter certain social situations, we'll be able to be more present and we'll be able to feel that self-regulation or calm. When you're talking to someone, I want us to be thinking just, how well do I know them? And I always call this, who is your audience? Like, who is it that I am talking to? Who is my audience? And that comes from me being a theater kid. I always think about everybody as an audience. And then practice being present enough to think that. Practice just thinking those thoughts. What I find is just by thinking, how well do I know this person? As we're talking to them, you start to self-edit. Not 100% of the time, not everyone, but I really find that helps. I create rules, and that is me. And I find this works really well with my clients. If this doesn't work for you, you don't have to do it. But here are my rules. If someone is not a real friend, if they are an acquaintance, if they are a buddy, if they are a work colleague that I do not know as well, I don't share as much vulnerable information. I don't talk about body fluids, odor, hygiene, sexual history, money, medical history, childhood trauma, right? You can think about who you tend to overshare around, when you tend to overshare, and what are the topics? Maybe it's a divorce. Maybe it's, your parents. I remember the first time I really noticed someone say something very neutral, like, oh, I have difficult parents. I was like, wow, oh my God, I've never even thought of saying that. And maybe you come up with some phrases around those folks so that that this history, tends to bring up the oversharing, the too much detail. And so you come up with a little phrase that you're going to use. And that way, when you have a real friendship with someone and you grow closer to them. You can share all that history. But until then, you're not sharing it with everyone. You're saying something like, I come from a challenging family. What does practice look like? Okay, so what I told you is I feel like every time I open my car door, I'm trying to sort of say I'm working on this. If I'm entering a party, I'm thinking I'm going to practice. I'm trying to remember that they're a friendly stranger. They're an acquaintance. I mentioned I try to anchor myself in my car. I have a little pause button to remind me to pause. I tend to set those things around the house, not denying sometimes I don't notice them, but it does help remind me of my intention, right? Remember, Dr. Russell Barkley always says, ADHD is not knowing what to do, it's doing what you know. And then when I go into the party, I'm going to try to not overshare on certain topics or not overshare with someone who I don't know really well. But we do overshare, right? So if you're oversharing, I like to have a pivot plan, right? So a little recovery plan. When you're in it, a lot of times people will say to me, I was in it, I realized I was down the rabbit hole, and then I didn't know what to do. So you can say something jokey. Now, I like to use humor a lot personally, but you can come up with your own phrases. So I say things like, oh, wow, I've had a lot of coffee today. Or, where am I going? I'm sorry. I'm down a rabbit hole. What were you saying before? Or I'll say like, well, I've said enough. You tell me about your weekend. And I have those little phrases in my back pocket because I do sometimes go down the rabbit hole, and I do sometimes find that we're in the overshare and I want to stop. There's no reason I can't sort of pivot, except that I need a pivot plan. And when you have a pivot plan and you start doing this, what I find is that people start curbing that and self-editing sooner and coming out of it. And then probably the other person isn't thinking about it at all. We get bored sometimes. So when we get bored, I have little phrases that I say. I find that sometimes we overshare or we go to a certain place because we're bored. And so you can also shift someone toward your interest and say things like, this is what I learned, or I want to share this, or that reminds me of a topic. If you want to shift someone away from something that you're not that interested in and you want to find some more common ground. If you have been absent from someone for a long time, we talked about this before, I really want to encourage us to rekindle those relationships and re-break the ice. I saw this and I thought of you. Take advantage of milestones, birthdays, share a joke, say, I thought of you. Tell them, I am sorry. I am terrible at keeping up with you, but I really, want to continue to see you. One of my college roommates posted her daughter doing this like amazing gymnastics routine. And I was like, oh my God, that kid is so old. I cannot believe I have missed this much. And so I just wrote her, a funny joke about how she and I have never done anything athletic in our lives. And then she just started writing back to me. I think that there's a real possibility for us ending these shame cycles. I want to say that I work on everything every day. And I know so many of you were writing before this webinar with so many questions. I really want to say, please, feel free. I'm going to share. This is my book. And then I have a free gift for you to download about helping you to demystify friendship. And my email is right there. I make videos on social media about all these topics with even more in-depth step-by-step to help you figure this out. I really think we deserve so much from friendship, and the past tends to color the way we feel about it. But we have a lot to offer, and we are so fun and creative. And so I want to encourage you to really remember that about yourself, and to know that we deserve to have these kinds of friendships. So I hope you'll keep in touch and reach out and let me know what topics would help you. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Carly because we want to answer questions.
Yes, Caroline, thank you so much. That was incredible. I have a notebook full of notes here. And we have many questions. Before we dig into the Q&A, I will quickly thank Inflow once more for sponsoring today's webinar. And I actually want to turn back to the questions that we asked at the outset of the webinar, because I think they can help guide our Q&A. So we asked, if you do habitually overshare, what do you think is the main root cause of this behavior? And almost a third, 30% of people said they felt that it was a need for personal connection, which I thought was so interesting, that clearly you're here today. Clearly you feel this, you feel how important it is to have these connections, and you're making the effort to make it happen. And that led, also, there was a question that tied into this. Someone who said, like when you're meeting someone, even on a first date, for example, and you want to suss out, is there a connection here? This person is a stranger. That fine line between figuring out if there's a connection and a path forward, and really divulging too much. Maybe you could talk about that nuance.
I think that I always look in the dating world, because there is so little on adult friendship with ADHD and neurodivergence in research. And one of the things I read about that I've been using, I think, is great advice. So if you're thinking about finding your people, and you're thinking about who they are, there might be some things that you are particularly interested in that would make you connect with someone. So here's something that I read. There was someone, and they said, I love to watch scary movies, and I really don't think I could have a girlfriend who didn't want to watch scary movies. So I will bring up scary movies. So rather than bringing up, history of debt and, other things, to bring up, hey, I love scary movies, or I love true crime, or I am really into, and then name something, and see if the person is also into it, right? Or say if they say, I don't do hot yoga, but I do this. And that is a good way to say, oh, okay, I'm getting to know them, which I totally hear that impetus, but I'm not necessarily oversharing or sharing something that is going to be, actually, to be honest, sometimes not even relevant to whether you zing with them.
Yeah, I love that. And it ties into, I think, that 2 minutes in the car that you were talking about, like, just have that check-in and say, like, what's really critical for me to know if this relationship is going to work? And that way you have something to anchor you that's not maybe a story you'd be better off saving for a later date.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to return quickly to our survey. The second most common answer that we saw was poor impulse control, getting as the root cause of oversharing. And this was pretty common. We saw this, that some people said they just feel they have to share something before they forget it. And so they'll talk over someone, interrupt, that kind of thing. And I wonder, this is a core ADHD trait, impulsivity. Are there tricks for keeping those thoughts in your mind, not forgetting them, so that you can contribute them at a more appropriate time in the conversation?
Yeah, I have a few tricks. So one of them comes from Danny Donovan. So I want to give her full credit. She goes like this, And this is like her little reminder. And what I've been doing is I just sort of put my hand on my thigh when I'm talking to someone, and I make this little thing. And it's to remind myself of what I want to say. That may or may not work for you. The other thing I want to say is, here's something I've realized as a person with ADD. A lot of times I have an overwhelming impulse to share, but what I have to share, to be honest, isn't all that in a bag of chips. So if I just stayed in the conversation and talked to someone, and I know this can be impossible, the intrusive thoughts come, you can't stop, it's impulsive, then I might forget what I was going to share, but something else comes. And since it's not, live or die, it's okay. The other thing is to do tricks where you say what you're thinking you want to share, but that takes away from you being present in the conversation. I think the impulse aspect really partly comes from are we able to practice giving space in the conversation? It's really hard, but I do have YouTube videos about these topics where I show how to give that 1 or 2 beats before you jump in and to practice so you get more used to it. Because I think what you'll find is like it actually enriches you. And once you start practicing, you get kind of used to it.
Yes. Yeah. Conversation is an art, right? Yeah. It's hard work. Okay. So, the third most common root cause, mentioned in our survey today was a strong people pleasing tendency. And we definitely see this a lot, in the feedback that we get from attitude readers. And it kind of raised a really interesting whole group here today who said, you know what, I'm not an oversharer, I'm an overhearer. I tend to attract people who unload too much on me, and I don't know how to kind of set up those guardrails to protect my own mental health and maybe ditch these toxic friends. So a lot of people here today said that whether it's because they're a people pleaser or maybe because they're introverted, maybe they've been burned before, that they end up overhearing and they don't know how to get out of it.
I think that is so true. And I'm so glad that the group here today has really brought that into words, because that is something I have long thought, but didn't really have the words for. So thank you, everyone. I will definitely be doing some stuff with this. So we're very sympathetic. We're very empathetic. I can feel other people's distress. And many of us have that characteristic. And so we overhear. Maybe we do tend toward people pleasing for whatever, background reasons. There's a couple things. I have a handout that I've been giving people that I'm happy if you email me, I will happily send this to you. That is about red flags. So that as you're having a conversation, if you hear red flags that someone is toxic, and I see a lot about toxic in the chat here, and you're hearing, but you're hearing stuff that is a red flag, you can identify that and not enter into the relationship. I think also what we tend to do is we want to give to that person and sort of balm their wound and make them feel better. And so one of the things that I do with many of my clients is we have some self-talk around that, if this is a tendency. And the self-talk can sometimes be something that's come up with by you. One of my clients thinks that's not my rodeo, like not my deal. And so they say kind things, but they're not agreeing to, move you, give you money, do other things for you. And I think we have a tendency to struggle with silence. And so when someone is sharing that stuff and we're overhearing, we often will fill in that gap and therefore agree to stuff and give because we don't love the silence. And if you resemble that remark, definitely let's work on having comfort with silence, because sometimes people are like, I agreed to this because I hated the silence and they were sort of asking. And so I gave. And I think also to have some rules for yourself, how long and how much do you need to know someone before you will give certain things like money and time to them? What do you need to see in terms of reciprocity from that relationship? But I definitely love this topic because I think it's so true.
Yes, it was a big theme here today. And I did want to mention that based on your last webinar with Attitude, which we will provide a link to in the resources section after this one, based on that, we were able to put together is your friendship toxic quiz. And so we'll share that out because we did have a number of people asking, how do I know if the relationship is toxic or not? And if not, I guess this is the next question. How can I broach this topic? So somebody wrote in to say they have some friends who do have ADHD, who have engaged in some of these behaviors, and she wants some tips on ways to have a conversation with them about sharing too much, about perhaps being, late to engagements, talking over her in a way that respects the fact that she understands, rejection sensitive dysphoria is a real thing. She doesn't want to hurt her friends, but she also needs to address these things to keep the friendship strong.
Yeah. So I think this is really hard, and I admire the desire to be kind because I think it's so important. I don't think there's any benefit to making anyone feel bad. I really don't. And we all have things, this is something I say to my clients all the time. Everybody has stuff. So yeah, you might overshare, but the other person might not always be that fun, whatever it is. Everybody has stuff. One of the things I would say is to maybe come at it from a really kind perspective, like, hey, I know this is really hard. What can we do together, right, to figure this out? Or to say, hey, I've been trying to educate myself about neurodiversity, and I heard about this topic of oversharing. Get them talking about it, and then see if they will sort of talk about the fact that they struggle with this, and then you can have a conversation. I've noticed, sometimes it is hard. What can we do? I think it's better than sort of any kind of text message. I think it's better that it's an in-person conversation because it can trigger a rejection sensitivity. The biggest thing I have to say is I wouldn't make anybody wrong, and I wouldn't make anybody feel like this is a deal breaker because I think that that's not fair. I think everyone is working on something. And maybe own the things you're working on because everybody's working on something. And there's a bunch of people, Carly, wanting the red flags thing. I don't know how to put it into the chat. I don't want to go searching my computer. But they can email me, Caroline at CarolineMaguireAuthor.com, or maybe, I don't know if I'll have access to the chat.
Yes, we can definitely provide also your email in the follow-up. Everyone who's listening here, you will receive an email from Attitude with a link to the replay. So if you wanted to share this with someone or just review it yourself, you can see the slides, and we'll put Caroline's email address in there as well. So if you had follow-up questions or wanted to get those red flags, you can do that. So okay. You mentioned just a moment ago about reciprocity in a relationship, and a number of people here saying that they feel they are always the one planning, and they don't feel that their friend is reaching out. And so I guess that question is, at what point do you cut bait? And how do you know if is this other person just, as you said, dealing with their own stuff? Or are they trying to tell me that this friendship is not for them?
Well, so I have a couple questions because this comes up a lot. And I was just joking to someone yesterday, when I was pregnant with my son 10 years ago, my friends didn't get together at all because I'm the host. And I was like really shocked. They didn't do anything when I was out on maternity leave. But I think it's important that we think about this because sometimes we are giving too much. One of the things I like to look at is, how do they respond? So, if you are always the one who invites them, do they say little things like, oh, I'm so bad at planning? Do they come? Do they seem to want to spend time with you and it's just that they're not great planners? I also think, do they stay when you're with them and stay present in the conversation, maybe stay longer than the conversation's happening? I also have a handout on this, by the way, called green flags. They're signs that someone really wants to be your friend. I think the other thing too is, do they share with you? Are they sharing? And is the relationship increasing in terms of sharing? Do they give to you? If you drop hints that you need something, do they give to you? Is it always their plan? So I think a red flag or a flag to me of like there isn't reciprocity is that you're going to the movies they want to go to, you're eating the takeout they want to do, you're going to the restaurants. That to me is where, I'm now worried about the fact that I'm always the one planning. How responsive are they? And what do you know about their history of responsiveness? Because I would hate for people to account for us as, oh, Caroline doesn't want to be my friend. She doesn't text me back for 3 days. I don't want that. We have to remember who we are. And one of the other things is that if we're both investing in the relationship, they should care what you want to do. So one of the things I would do is I would say some things that you want to do and see if they bite or if they're just on their terms. Because I think where we want to cut the relationship is if it's just on their terms. And I think the more we have shared experiences with people, we go to activities and stuff that is our high interest so that we are not bored, the more we have the chance to meet different people and the more we're not dependent on one relationship, so that if we do have an emerging friend and they aren't working out, we have other irons in the fire and we're not feeling dependent on them and we're not feeling like, oh, I have to put up with this, because we don't need to put up with any of it.
I love that. That's an important reminder. And, I did want to mention, if you are an Attitude Magazine subscriber, and I hope you are, in our summer issue, we have a feature package about loneliness. We know that loneliness is a serious health risk. The Surgeon General of the United States has called it an epidemic, and we know that it's tied to cardiovascular disease, dementia, stroke, anxiety, depression, all of these things. We learned some interesting things. We surveyed about 4,000 Attitude readers, and more than half of you told us that you feel most comfortable in relationships with other neurodivergent people for a lot of understandable reasons. And so I guess just wanted to, make you aware of the fact that a lot of people find comfort in relationships where they don't have to explain themselves quite as much. And that also 2/3 of people said that they feel better when they make any effort to connect with people. So if you're feeling hesitant about reaching out to someone who maybe you've lost touch with or who you flaked on last time they invited you, 2/3 of people said they feel better and less lonely when they make any effort. So I just had to throw that in there because this has been such an eye-opening bit of work that we've been doing on loneliness, and it really dovetails. So Caroline, thank you so much for all of your contributions to this conversation today. This was really, really such an interesting webinar. I enjoyed it so much. Thank you.
No, thank you. And loneliness is a huge issue, and that's why I'm here. And that's why I have been here for 18 years, so that we can find a way to make the connections that we need and to feel good about the way we do friendship.
Yes, it's critical. And thank you to everybody who was listening today. You sent in some really amazing questions. If you want to access the resources again from this webinar, you can always go on attitudemag.com and search for podcast 496. You're going to find the slides and the recordings in a few hours. And if you're listening in replay mode, you can just click on the episode description, your podcast player, and know that you can always find a full library of all our webinars, including our past webinars with Caroline, in the ADHD Experts podcast on all of your streaming platforms. To make sure you don't miss any future webinars, articles, research, anything, you can always sign up for our newsletters at attitudemag.com/newsletters. Caroline, thank you again. And everyone listening, have a wonderful day. Thank you for being part of the Attitude community.
Thank you.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.